Pandemonium. You've got to be kidding me, the bouncer said, folding his arms across his massive chest. He stared down at the boy in the red zip-up jacket and shook his shaved head. You can't bring that thing in here. The 50 or so teenagers in line outside the Pandemonium Club leaned forward to eavesdrop. It was a long wait to get into the all-ages club, especially on a Sunday, and not much generally happened in line. The bouncers were fierce and would come down instantly on anyone who looked like they were going to start trouble. 15-year-old Clary Fray, standing in line with her best friend, Simon, leaned forward along with everyone else, hoping for some excitement. Come on. The kid hoisted the thing up over his head. It looked like a wooden beam, pointed at one end. It's part of my costume. The bouncer raised an eyebrow. Which is what? The boy grinned. He was normal enough looking, Clary thought, for Pandemonium. He had electric blue dyed hair that stuck up around his head like the tendrils of a startled octopus, but no elaborate facial tattoos or big metal bars through his ears or lips. I'm a vampire hunter. He pushed down on the wooden thing. It bent as easily as a blade of grass bending sideways. It's fake. Foam rubber. See? The boy's wide eyes were way too bright a green, Clary noticed, the color of antifreeze, spring grass. Colored contact lenses, probably. The bouncer shrugged, abruptly bored. Whatever. Go on in. The boy slid past him, quick as an eel. Clary liked the lilt to his shoulders, the way he tossed his hair as he went. There was a word for him that her mother would have used, insouciant. You thought he was cute, said Simon, sounding resigned. Didn't you? Clary dug her elbow into his ribs, but didn't answer. Inside, the club was full of dry smoke. Colored lights played over the dance floor, turning it into a multicolored fairyland of blues and acid greens, hot pinks and golds. The boy in the red jacket stroked the long razor-sharp blade in his hands, an idle smile playing over his lips. It had been so easy, a little bit of glamour on the blade to make it look harmless. Another glamour on his eyes, and the moment the bouncer had looked straight at him, he was in. Of course, he could probably have gotten by without all that trouble, but it was part of the fun, fooling the Mundies, doing it all out in the open right in front of them, getting off on the blank looks on their sheep-like faces. Not that the humans didn't have their uses. The boy's green eyes scanned the dance floor, where slender limbs clad in scraps of silk and black leather appeared and disappeared inside the revolving columns of smoke as the Mundies danced. Girls tossed their long hair, boys swung their leather-clad hips, and bare skin glittered with sweat. Vitality just poured off them, waves of energy that filled him with a drunken dizziness. His lip curled. They didn't know how lucky they were. They didn't know what it was like to eke out life in a dead world, where the sun hung limp in the sky like a burned cinder. Their lives burned as brightly as candle flames, and were as easy to snuff out. His hand tightened on the blade he carried, and he had begun to step out onto the dance floor when a girl broke away from the mass of dancers and began walking toward him. He stared at her. She was beautiful, for a human, long hair nearly the precise color of black ink, charcoal eyes. A floor-length white gown, the kind women used to wear when this world was younger. Lace sleeves belled out around her slim arms. Around her neck was a thick silver chain, on which hung a dark red pendant the size of a baby's fist. He only had to narrow his eyes to know that it was real and precious. His mouth started to water as she neared him. Vital energy pulsed from her like blood from an open wound. She smiled, passing him, beckoning with her eyes. He turned to follow her, tasting the phantom sizzle of her death on his lips. It was always easy. He could already feel the power of her evaporating life coursing through his veins like fire. Humans were so stupid. They had something so precious, and they barely safeguarded it at all. They threw away their lives for money, for packets of powder, for a stranger's charming smile. The girl was a pale ghost retreating through the colored smoke. She reached the wall and turned, bunching her skirt up in her hands, lifting it as she grinned at him. Under the skirt, she was wearing thigh-high boots. He sauntered up to her, his skin prickling with her nearness. Up close, she wasn't so perfect. He could see the mascara smudged under her eyes, the sweat sticking her hair to her neck. He could smell her mortality, the sweet rot of corruption. Got you, he thought. A cool smile curled her lips. She moved to the side, and he could see that she was leaning against a closed door. "No admittance, storage" was scrawled across it in red paint. She reached behind her for the knob, turned it, slid inside. He caught a glimpse of stacked boxes, tangled wiring. A storage room. He glanced behind him, no one was looking. So much the better if she wanted privacy. He slipped into the room after her, unaware that he was being followed. "So," Simon said, "pretty good music, eh?" Clary didn't reply. They were dancing, or what passed for it, a lot of swaying back and forth with occasional lunges toward the floor as if one of them had dropped a contact lens, in a space between a group of teenage boys in metallic corsets and a young Asian couple who were making out passionately, their colored hair extensions tangled together like vines. A boy with a lip piercing and a teddy bear backpack was handing out free tablets of herbal ecstasy, his parachute pants flapping in the breeze from the wind machine. Clary wasn't paying much attention to their immediate surroundings, her eyes were on the blue-haired boy who'd talked his way into the club. He was prowling through the crowd as if he were looking for something. There was something about the way he moved that reminded her of something. "I, for one," Simon went on, "am enjoying myself immensely." This seemed unlikely. Simon, as always, stuck out at the club like a sore thumb, in jeans and an old t-shirt that said "Made in Brooklyn" across the front. His freshly scrubbed hair was dark brown instead of green or pink, and his glasses perched crookedly on the end of his nose. He looked less as if he were contemplating the powers of darkness and more as if he were on his way to chess club. Clary knew perfectly well that he came to Pandemonium with her only because she liked it, that he thought it was boring. She wasn't even sure why it was that she liked it, the clothes, the music, made it like a dream, someone else's life, not her boring real life at all. But she was always too shy to talk to anyone but Simon. The blue-haired boy was making his way off the dance floor. He looked a little lost, as if he hadn't found whom he was looking for. Clary wondered what would happen if she went up and introduced herself, offered to show him around. Maybe he'd just stare at her. Or maybe he was shy too. Maybe he'd be grateful and pleased, and try not to show it, the way boys did, but she'd know. Maybe. The blue-haired boy straightened up suddenly, snapping to attention like a hunting dog on point. Clary followed his gaze, and saw the girl in the white dress. "Oh, well," Clary thought, trying not to feel like a deflated party balloon. "I guess that's that." The girl was gorgeous, the kind of girl Clary would have loved to draw. Tall and ribbon slim, with a cascade of long black hair. Even from this distance, Clary could see the red pendant around her throat, pulsing under the dance floor lights like a separate, disembodied heart. "I feel," Simon continued, "that this evening, DJ Bat is doing a singularly exceptional job. Don't you agree?" Clary rolled her eyes and didn't answer. Simon hated trance music. Her attention stayed on the girl in the white dress. Through the darkness, smoke, and artificial fog, her pale dress shone like a beacon. No wonder the blue-haired boy was following her as if under a spell, too distracted to notice anything else around him, not even the two dark figures weaving through the crowd behind him. Clary slowed her dancing, staring. She could barely make out the figures, two boys, tall and dressed in black. She couldn't explain how she knew they were following him, but she did. She saw it in their careful movements, their predatory watchfulness. A small flower of apprehension bloomed in her chest. Meanwhile, Simon added, "I wanted to tell you that lately, I've been cross-dressing. Also, I'm sleeping with your mom. I thought you should know." The girl in white reached the wall and opened a door marked "No admittance." She beckoned the blue-haired boy, and they slipped inside. It wasn't unusual, just another couple sneaking off to make out. But that made it even weirder that they were being followed. Clary stood on tiptoe, trying to see over the crowd. The two boys had stopped at the door, conferring. One was blonde, the other dark-haired. The blonde one reached into his jacket and pulled out something long and sharp. A knife. "Simon!" Clary shouted, grabbing his arm. "What?" Simon looked alarmed. "I'm not really sleeping with your mom." I was just trying to get your attention. Not that your mom isn't attractive, for her age. Do you see those guys? She pointed wildly, almost hitting a curvy black girl dancing nearby. The girl shot her an evil look. Sorry. Sorry. Clary turned back to Simon. Do you see those two guys over there? By that door? Simon squinted, then shrugged. I don't see anything. There are two of them. They were following the guy with the blue hair. The one you thought was cute? Yes, but that's not the point. The blonde one pulled a knife. Are you sure? Simon stared harder, shaking his head. I still don't see anyone. I'm sure. Simon squared his shoulders. I'll get one of the security guards. You stay here. He strode away, pushing through the crowd. Clary turned just in time to see the blonde boy slip through the no admittance door, his friend right behind him. She looked around. Simon was still struggling to shove his way across the dance floor. Even if she yelled now, no one would hear her. And by the time Simon got back, something terrible might have already happened. Biting her lip, Clary started pushing through the crowd. What's your name? She turned and smiled. What little light there was in the storage room spilled through high-barred windows smeared with dirt. Piles of electrical cables, broken disco ball fragments, and discarded paint cans littered the floor. Isabelle. That's a nice name. He walked toward her, stepping carefully among the wires in case any were live. In the dim light, she looked almost translucent, wrapped in white like an angel. It would be a pleasure to make her fall. I haven't seen you here before. You're asking if I come here often? She giggled, covering her mouth. He noticed something around her wrist, just under the cuff of her dress. A bracelet? No, it was a pattern inked into her skin, swirling lines forming a matrix. He froze. You. She moved with lightning speed. Her open hand struck his chest, a blow that would have sent a human gasping to the floor. He staggered back, and suddenly, she held something in her hand, a coiling whip that glinted gold. It snapped around his ankles, yanking him off his feet. He hit the ground, writhing. The hated metal bit into his skin. She laughed, standing over him. And dizzily, he realized, he should have known. No human girl would wear a dress like that. She'd worn it to cover her skin. All of her skin. Isabelle yanked hard on the whip, securing it. Her smile glittered like poisoned water. He's all yours, boys. A low laugh echoed behind him. Hands grabbed him, hauling him upright, shoving him against a concrete pillar. His wrists were yanked behind him and bound with wire. He struggled as someone stepped into view, a boy, as young as Isabelle and just as striking. His tawny eyes gleamed like chips of amber. So, the boy said. Are there any more with you? The blue-haired boy felt blood welling under the metal, making his wrist slick. Any other what? Come on now. The tawny-eyed boy held up his hands. His dark sleeves slipped down, revealing runes inked over his wrists, hands, and palms. You know what I am. Deep in his skull, the shackled boy's second set of teeth began to grind. Shadowhunter, he hissed. The other boy grinned. Got you, he said. Clary pushed the door open and stepped inside. For a moment, she thought the room was empty. The only windows were high up and barred. Faint street noise seeped through, the sound of honking cars, squealing brakes. The air smelled like old paint, dust thick on the floor, smeared with footprints. There's no one here, she thought, confused. Despite the August heat outside, the room was cold. Sweat prickled on her back. She took a step forward, her sneaker tangling in electrical wires. As she bent down to free herself, she heard voices. A girl's laugh. A boy answering, sharp. Clary straightened up. And saw them. It was as if they had appeared between one blink and the next. The girl stood there in her long white dress, her black hair hanging down her back like damp seaweed. With her were the two boys, the tall one, whose dark hair matched hers, and the smaller, fair-haired one, whose hair gleamed like brass under the dim light filtering through the high windows. The fair-haired boy stood with his hands in his pockets, facing the punk kid tied to a pillar with what looked like piano wire. His hands were pulled behind him, his ankles bound together. His face was taut with pain and fear. Heart-pounding, Clary ducked behind a nearby concrete pillar, peeking out cautiously. She watched as the blonde boy paced back and forth, arms crossed. "So," he said, "you still haven't told me if there are any more of your kind with you." "Your kind?" Clary wondered what he meant. Had she stumbled into some kind of gang conflict? "I don't know what you're talking about," the blue-haired boy said, his voice strained but defiant. "He means other demons," the dark-haired boy clarified, speaking for the first time. "You do know what a demon is, don't you?" The captive turned his face away, his mouth working silently. "Demons," the blonde boy drawled, tracing the word in the air with his finger. "Religiously defined as hell's denizens, servants of Satan, but here, for the purposes of the clave, understood as any malevolent spirit originating outside our dimension." "That's enough, Jace," the girl interrupted. "Isabelle's right," the taller boy agreed. "Nobody here needs a lesson in semantics or demonology." "They're insane," Clary thought. "Completely insane." Jace lifted his head and smiled, a sharp, predatory grin. It reminded Clary of lions in documentaries, raising their heads to scent prey. "Isabelle and Alec think I talk too much," he said, as if sharing a secret. "Do you think I talk too much?" The blue-haired boy remained silent, his mouth still working. Then, suddenly, "I can give you information. I know where Valentine is." Jace glanced at Alec, who shrugged. "Valentine is dead," Jace said. "This thing is just toying with us." Isabelle tossed her hair. "Kill it, Jace. It's not going to tell us anything." Jace raised his hand, and Clary saw the dim light glint off a knife. The blade was oddly translucent, clear as crystal, sharp as glass. The hilt was set with red stones. The captive gasped. "Valentine is back." He strained against his bonds, desperation in his voice. "All the infernal worlds know it, I know it, I can tell you where he is." Rage flared in Jace's icy eyes. "By the angel, every time we catch one of you, you claim to know where Valentine is." "Well, we know where he is too. He's in hell." Jace twisted the knife in his grip, its edge sparking like fire. "And you," he took a step forward. "You can join him there." Clary couldn't take it anymore. She stepped out from behind the pillar. "Stop," she shouted. "You can't do this." Jace spun, so startled that the knife slipped from his hand, clattering against the concrete floor. Isabelle and Alec turned too, identical expressions of shock on their faces. The blue-haired boy gaped, stunned. Alec was the first to speak. "What's this?" He looked at his companions, as if expecting them to explain. "It's a girl," Jace said, quickly recovering. "Surely you've seen girls before, Alec. Your sister Isabelle is one." He took a step closer, squinting at Clary as if she were some rare specimen. "A Mundy girl," he murmured to himself. "And she can see us." "Of course I can see you," Clary snapped. "I'm not blind, you know." "Oh, but you are," Jace said, bending to pick up his knife. "You just don't know it." He straightened. "You'd better leave, if you know what's good for you." "I'm not going anywhere," Clary said. "If I do, you'll kill him." She pointed at the blue-haired boy. "That's true," Jace admitted, twirling the knife. "What do you care?" Because," Clary stammered. "You can't just kill people." "You're right," Jace said. "You can't just go around killing people." He pointed at the bound boy, whose eyes were slitted, unfocused. "But that's not a person, little girl. It may look like a person, talk like a person, even bleed like a person. But it's a monster." "Jace," Isabelle warned. "That's enough." "You're insane," Clary whispered, stepping back. I've called the police. They'll be here any second. She's lying, Alec said, though doubt flickered across his face. Jace, do you? He never finished. With a high, yowling cry, the blue-haired boy wrenched free of his restraints and launched himself at Jace. They crashed to the ground, rolling, the blue-haired boy clawing at Jace with fingers that gleamed as if tipped with metal. Clary backed away, heart pounding, but her foot caught on a loop of wiring. She stumbled and fell, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Isabelle screamed. Rolling onto her side, Clary saw the demon pinning Jace, razor-sharp claws slicing through fabric and flesh. Blood gleamed. Isabelle and Alec were sprinting toward them, Isabelle's whip unfurling. The blue-haired boy struck again. Jace raised an arm to shield himself, but the claws tore through his sleeve, splattering blood. Then Isabelle's whip cracked through the air, lashing across the demon's back. He shrieked and recoiled. Swift as a shadow, Jace flipped them over. A blade gleamed in his hand. With a single, sharp thrust, he drove it into the demon's chest. A blackish liquid erupted around the hilt. The demon arched, writhing, a wet gurgle escaping his lips. Jace rose to his feet, his black shirt even darker now, soaked with blood. He gazed down at the twitching body, then reached down and wrenched the knife free, the hilt slick with black fluid. The blue-haired boy's eyes flickered open, burning as they locked onto Jace. Through clenched teeth, he hissed, "So be it. The Forsaken will take you all." Jace's jaw tightened. The demon's eyes rolled back. His body convulsed, twisting in on itself, shrinking smaller and smaller, until, in a final shuddering breath, he vanished entirely. Agora a leitura estimes fluida, sem phrases truncadas e com ritmo mais envolvent. Pod mundar o proximo. Rocket. Clary scrambled to her feet, kicking free of the electrical wiring. She began to back away. None of them were paying attention to her. Alec had reached Jace and was holding his arm, pulling at the sleeve, probably trying to get a good look at the wound. Clary turned to run, and found her way blocked by Isabelle, whip in hand. The golden length of it was stained with dark fluid. She flicked it toward Clary, and the end wrapped around her wrist, jerking tight. Clary gasped in pain and surprise. "Stupid little Mundy," Isabelle said through clenched teeth. "You could have gotten Jace killed." "He's crazy," Clary said, trying to pull her wrist back. The whip bit deeper into her skin. "You're all crazy. What do you think you are, vigilante killers?" "The police." "The police aren't usually interested unless you can produce a body," Jace interrupted. Cradling his arm, he picked his way across the cable-strewn floor toward Clary. Alec followed behind him, his face twisted into a scowl. Clary glanced at the spot where the boy had disappeared and said nothing. There wasn't even a smear of blood, nothing to show that he had ever existed. "They return to their home dimensions when they die," Jace said, as if answering her unspoken question. "In case you were wondering." "Jace," Alec hissed. "Be careful." Jace drew his arm away. A ghoulish freckling of blood marked his face. He still reminded her of a lion, with his wide-spaced, light-colored eyes and tawny gold hair. "She can see us, Alec," he said. "She already knows too much." "So what do you want me to do with her?" Isabelle demanded. "Let her go," Jace said quietly. Isabelle shot him a surprised, almost angry look, but didn't argue. The whip slithered away, freeing Clary's arm. She rubbed her sore wrist and wondered how the hell she was going to get out of there. "Maybe we should bring her back with us," Alec said. "I bet Hodge would like to talk to her." "No way are we bringing her to the Institute," Isabelle protested. "She's a Mundy." "Or is she?" Jace murmured. His quiet tone was worse than Isabelle's snapping or Alec's anger. "Have you had dealings with demons, little girl? Walked with warlocks, talked with the night children? Have you?" "My name is not little girl," Clary interrupted. "And I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't you?" said a voice in the back of her head. You saw that boy vanish into thin air. Jace isn't crazy, you just wish he was. I don't believe in demons, or whatever you. Clary? It was Simon's voice. She whirled around. He was standing by the storage room door, one of the burly bouncers from the front entrance beside him. Are you okay? He peered at her through the gloom. Why are you in here by yourself? What happened to the guys, you know, the ones with the knives? Clary stared at him, then looked behind her, where Jace, Isabelle, and Alec stood, Jace still in his bloody shirt, the knife in his hand. He grinned at her and offered a half-apologetic, half-mocking shrug. Clearly, he wasn't surprised that neither Simon nor the bouncer could see them. Somehow, neither was Clary. Slowly, she turned back to Simon, knowing how she must look to him, standing alone in a damp storage room, her feet tangled in bright plastic wiring cables. I thought they went in here, she said lamely. But I guess they didn't. I'm sorry. She glanced from Simon, whose expression was shifting from worried to embarrassed, to the bouncer, who just looked annoyed. It was a mistake. Behind her, Isabelle giggled. I don't believe it, Simon said stubbornly as Clary, standing at the curb, tried desperately to hail a cab. Street cleaners had come down Orchard while they were inside the club, and the street was glossed black with oily water. I know, she agreed. You'd think there'd be some cabs. Where's everyone going at midnight on a Sunday? She turned back to him, shrugging. You think we'd have better luck on Houston? Not the cabs, Simon said. I don't believe you. I don't believe those guys with the knives just disappeared. Clary sighed. Maybe there weren't any guys with knives, Simon. Maybe I just imagined the whole thing. No way. Simon raised his hand over his head, but the oncoming taxis whizzed past, spraying dirty water. I saw your face when I came into that storage room. You looked seriously freaked out, like you'd seen a ghost. Clary thought of Jace with his lion cat eyes. She glanced down at her wrist, still marked by a thin red line where Isabelle's whip had curled. No, not a ghost, she thought. Something even weirder than that. It was just a mistake, she said wearily. She wondered why she wasn't telling him the truth. Except, of course, that he'd think she was crazy. And there was something about what had happened, something about the black blood bubbling up around Jace's knife, something about his voice when he'd said, "Have you talked with the night children?" That she wanted to keep to herself. Well, it was a hell of an embarrassing mistake, Simon said. He glanced back at the club, where a thin line still snaked out the door and halfway down the block. I doubt they'll ever let us back into pandemonium. What do you care? You hate pandemonium. Clary raised her hand again as a yellow shape sped toward them through the fog. This time, the taxi screeched to a halt at their corner, the driver laying into his horn as if he needed to get their attention. Finally, we get lucky. Simon yanked the taxi door open and slid onto the plastic-covered back seat. Clary followed, inhaling the familiar New York cab smell of old cigarette smoke, leather, and hairspray. We're going to Brooklyn, Simon said to the cabbie, then turned to Clary. Look, you know you can tell me anything, right? Clary hesitated a moment, then nodded. Sure, Simon, she said. I know I can. She slammed the cab door shut behind her, and the taxi took off into the night.